The Ghibli films have been such a massive source of inspiration for me and my work. I've decided to spend some time to sort of figure out a way to get as close as we can in 3D using Substance Painter. I'm going to be sharing that knowledge with you guys today. So enjoy. So let's get our project started. And create a new project, and we're going to use the Jade Toad sample file, which is provided in Substance Painter already. Just go ahead and remove all of the layers, and you can set the channel to base color. That's all we're going to be using for this project. We're going to set our base layer now. So using a simple fill layer, make sure you've turned roughness all the way up to 1 if you're going to be using this in a setting that is using lighting. But either way, for just the color, we're going to choose a nice, cool blue. You can throw some green in there as well if you like. One thing I want to mention is that don't stress too much about getting everything perfect right off the bat. This is a fully PBR material, so we can go back and change things later on. Now that our base layer is done, we're going to simulate brushstrokes. So create a new fill. We're going to add a black mask, and then after the black mask, we're going to add another fill. From here, we're going to use one of the procedural grunge maps, black and white spots 1 in the grayscale slot. You're going to see one of the main tricks I use here to turn a realistic grunge texture into a hand-painted look, and that's going to be using the blur slope filter. And you can see it's transformed it into a more hand-painted feel. It looks much more stylized than it did before. This blur slope filter is going to be the main driving force behind this project. Now after that, we're going to make sure that we add a blur directional filter as well, just to give it that swiping motion of the paintbrush strokes. And finally, to add some thickness to it without actually adding a thickness layer, we're going to use sharpen. If you add if you increase the intensity of a sharpen filter, it almost pops out the edges of the brushstrokes, makes it look a little more believable. And then all you have to do is turn down the opacity a little bit, and you've got some nice little brushstrokes. Carrying on from that idea, we're going to replicate that a few more times to add some layers to the paintbrush strokes as well. So create a folder, because we're going to keep everything organized, and add your first fill layer to it. PBR is fantastic because it allows us to create all of these layers like this, and then go back and experiment with them and change them around. So just like last time, we're going to add a black mask and add a filter. And this time I used the cells 4. Now this is a little overwhelming and too noisy, so what you can do is you can bring down the balance all the way down, and then that'll actually remove a lot of the cells from there and add that patchy look in the brushstrokes. And just like the layer before it, we're going to add a blur slope to give it that hand-painted look. Once you play around with the settings a bit and get a result that you like, the main idea is that we're going to be duplicating this layer about 2 to 3 more times and just slightly tweaking all of the values. Adding size, rotating a little bit, changing color, hue. All these small tweaks are going to add a richness and depth to this texture that are going to really help sell that hand-painted look. Now, since this is a fully PBR material, don't be afraid to go back and make bold colors and big shapes. Everything doesn't have to blend in nicely and fit nicely. We can always change it, and part of this art style, it has a lot of bright colors popping out in places you wouldn't expect it to be. Don't forget to mess with the opacity mode and the blending modes as well. I found that the overlay blending mode worked best for this. Give it a nice soft touch on top of the base texture. One important thing is don't forget to change the folder itself. The blending mode has to be overlay as well. I ended up trying to use some orange here because I wanted to give it a splash of color. I don't think I end up using it in my final texture, but I want to show you guys the process behind it anyway, just so you can see my thought process and how I'm experimenting with these really, really loud colors to get the result I want. In the end, I think I just go with white because I wanted to keep it simple for this project. So the main idea for this folder is basically create your first layer using the cells fill texture, and then go ahead and duplicate it 2 or 3 times and then just change the values in the smallest bit. And that's going to add some really, really nice layering and depth to this texture. It already looks pretty good from here. And after a bit of finessing, this is the final texture I ended up with. It looks like that using the normal blend, but when you switch it to overlay, you get this nice dull tone with a lot of hand-painted brushstrokes on there. Speaking of depth, you may notice that this still looks a little flat. So we're gonna add some ambient occlusion in here by adding a black mask, and then we're gonna add a generator, and we're gonna use the ambient occlusion generator. One thing to keep in mind is make sure you have to invert it, and you can see now the white texture is only being picked up in the crevices. Last thing is switch to multiply. And then from here, all we really have to do is right click, and we're gonna add the blur slope filter one more time, just to give it that hand painted look. Again, we're gonna basically blur slope everything. So play around with this setting as much as you want. As long as you've got a bit of darkness in the crevices, you should be good. And now that we have the crevices sorted out, let's go ahead and make the edges pop too by using a curvature generator. Same thing as the AO, except this time all we're going to do is use a slightly lighter color than the grayish blue that we're using, and we're going to add a curvature generator after adding our black mask. The edge highlights don't need to be very prominent, they just need to be slightly lighter than the texture underneath. And the last thing we're going to do is add a blur slope filter to that to add a hand painted look to the curvature texture as well. And that's pretty much the tutorial. You can right click and then save this as a smart material and add it to your shelf so you can drag and drop it onto any object and every texture you're using in the future. The cool thing about this is, since it's so customizable, you can actually change the colors if you want, and I've replicated some really cool snow and dirt textures as well. I really, really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I know I had a ton of fun making it. I'm going to be doing some more of these in the very near future. But for now, thank you for watching.